Our first reading this morning is a poem I chose purely because it's about a dog, and this is the Blessing of the Animals Sunday. So this is by the poet Mark S. Burroughs, and it's called The Heart of Now. It's a lesson that he's learned from his dog. The Heart of Now. This morning, I headed to the woods as I do each morning without a single thought of accomplishing anything in my mind. And why should I? My dog, always eager for a walk, doesn't ever imagine some future delight, but lives headlong into unknowable possibilities of joy with a reckless disregard of order or propriety. She refuses the press of anxiety that seems to wait for us at every crossroads, holding her head high to catch what the wind brings, facing the heart of now with a glad intention that lightens my soul with something like a song. I feel like the dogs who are with us here this morning all maybe can teach us that as well. The Bible reading this morning, we're going off the assigned section, the assigned cycle of readings, because none of them felt like they were particularly good for a day when we're having animals in church. I don't know if the animals care what Bible readings we choose, but I thought I'd do one that celebrated creation anyway. So we're going to hear parts of Genesis 1, and it says this. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. That's how it starts. But one thing about that word wind is that the Hebrew term can also be translated as spirit. And that's how the ancient rabbis who kept and told this story took it. They told it as spirit. And they thought that spirit would have hovered over those murky waters like a bird. In fact, the Talmud, which is sort of an extended Jewish commentary and set of debates on the Hebrew scriptures, it specifies that the Spirit of God hovered over the surface of the waters like a dove. Imagine that, the majestic and imposing process of conjuring something out of nothing, of bringing order out of all that chaos, overseen by a fragile and fancified pigeon, which is all a dove really is. The story goes on to imagine all the ways in which our daily realities came to be, the separation of night from day, of dry from wet. Separating dry from wet feels like it would be useful today, right? The ordering of the cosmos, the burst of creative energy that gave rise to all of life. And in this, which is the first creation myth of the Bible, the one that figures the acts of creation as taking place over a cosmic week, whatever that means before you figure out that a week is about the way that a week works. Each day that the story says holds a response of wonder and delight. The pattern. God said something, let something happen, and it happened. And God saw that it was good. That's the poetic pattern of the story. Each of the days, God said, let something happen, and it happened. And God saw that it was good. So when the story gets around to sentient life, beyond the stars and the moon and the waters, when it gets around to things with nervous systems and things that breathe, things like us and like our friends here, this is how it goes. God said, let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the sky. So God created the great sea monsters, I love that, the sea monsters, and every kind of every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, and every kind of winged bird. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters in the seas and let birds multiply on the earth. And then God said, let the earth bring forth all kinds of living creatures, cattle and creeping things and wild animals. And it was so. God made the wild animals and the cattle and everything that creeps upon the ground, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness." And this is God's good news some days. I spent more time than I would like to admit this week watching YouTube videos of prairie chickens. Just the name alone, prairie chickens, how can you not be amused and drawn into that? And there are actually multiple kinds, the greater prairie chicken, the lesser prairie chicken. They're not even really chickens, they're just kinds of grouses. Related to pheasants, really. They live in the plains areas of the country. They're totally fascinating. Specifically, what is fascinating is the mating rituals. When it's the season for love, I feel like I should say that in a Barry White voice, the season for love, but I don't, my voice doesn't go that deep. They gather in an open field where the grass is low because visibility is key here. The males come out into the open and they hope to capture the attention of the eligible females there, which maybe makes it like the prairie version of a middle school dance. I don't know. The males, there's a routine that the males all do. And they're all competing with each other, so it can get kind of testy and aggressive. The dance that they do is really something. It's worth finding on YouTube. They've got what look like kind of pink-orange eyebrows. This is the greater prairie chicken. And they kind of puff up on the front of their face, and they've got these air sacs on the sides that are the same color, and they inflate them and deflate them, ooh, like that. Very, very colorful. And they make a sound that people refer to as booming, not because it's explosive, but as far as I could tell, because it's like this pure, sustained hoot that just happens over and over. Whoop, 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 whoop. And they've got two long feathers on the crowns of their heads that usually lay back like they've combed them down. But in the middle of this dance, they raise them up like two great big horns. And they make their back, they lean down, they put their tail feathers up in the air, their backs are as straight as possible, their wings down with the feathers spread out, and they make this hoot, hoot. You're recording me, I see, I'm being recorded on the screen. And they stomp their feet and jump. Hoot, 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 hoot. I need to be careful because I don't. Hi, I found someone to love me. Hi, this is my most successful prairie chicken dance ever. It's really quite a show. But they're disappearing. Oh, hello. For free range. This is amazing. This is absolutely my favorite Sunday of the year. Absolutely. The prairie chickens are disappearing. They're not listed under the Endangered Species Act, but they are considered threatened. In Minnesota, they used to be so plentiful that their flocks would cloud out the sky when they were up in the air. Now that the land, or the land that used to be their habitat and their breeding ground, is largely been paved over or monocropped with tremendous fields of corn or soybeans. So we're crowding them out, this amazing, colorful, entertaining species. In Debbie Blue's wonderful and provocative book, Consider the Birds, a provocative guide to birds of the Bible. It's really way more fascinating than you would take from that title. Consider the Birds, a provocative guide to birds of the Bible. She prods us to pay attention to the natural world. Specifically, in the case of her book, the birds, but her intention is broader than that. Paying attention, it means noticing and reflecting, which can teach us about God and teach us about ourselves. So she does this by meditating on birds that show up in biblical stories. And this is what she says about her aim in the book. She says, considering the birds is different than considering rocket science or technology. It gets you thinking different thoughts about creatures, creation, and the creator. Whatever bird I looked at and studied, however each was represented in the text, I was again and again struck by their vulnerability. Their flight is amazing, but it is because of their hollow bones, the fragile strength of their feathers, that they can fly. A bird can grow a new feather in 2 weeks, but it can also be wiped out that easily. Many birds are on the brink of extinction. Without human influence, habitat destruction, climate change, the expected rate of extinction for birds would be around 1 species per century. Some reports say we are losing 10 species a year. So she says, I hope that considering the birds will motivate us to press for more responsible human behavior. It's irritating me. Considering, reflecting on, paying attention to, noticing and knowing that God created them and called them good. Can we disregard what God has called good? Can we ignore and exploit and overconsume and pave out of existence that which springs forth from divine creativity? Just what is it anyway that we're doing each year when we bless the animals? Who's blessing and who's being blessed? That's a question. Cultivating habits of attention, what Debbie Blue is writing about. Habits of attention. That might just be what saves some threatened species, and it might just be what saves us. There are only about 5,000 prairie chickens left in the state of Minnesota at this point. There would undoubtedly be far fewer of them were it not for people who are learning how to pay attention. Outside one farm town, Glendon, the Nature Conservancy has restored a 6,500-acre piece of land called the Blue Stem Prairie Preserve. It's one of the last northern tall grass prairies in the country. In it, there is what used to be a gravel pit that the Nature Conservancy restored to make it the exact type of field that the prairie chickens like for their mating rituals. In fact, they moved on to that one because they liked it better than the one that was a little bit down the road. Nobody knows whether this will ultimately stem the decline of the species, but habits of attention have at least provided a respite for it. And those habits can probably need to start close to home, as well as out on the prairie. That can mean all kinds of things. For sure. Some of you are avid and talented gardeners. You pay attention to your watershed, to soil, the needs of the food and the flowers that you grow. You focus on native species. You maintain habitats for butterflies, for birds, for pollinators. You know deep in your bones the lessons of our interconnectedness with the earth, and the soil traces in your fingertips testifies to that. Of course, today is Blessing of the Animals, so I'm really thinking about our pets. Our pets can teach us some of the deep and wonderful habits of attentiveness. Maybe less so if they're cats, unless the lessons are about sleeping 20 hours a day and punching whoever uses your favorite toilet. At least that's what happens in my house. I don't know. Oh, and the joys of cardboard boxes, simple pleasures maybe. Cats can teach us things too. Our pets can teach us about affection, about the need to slow down, and teach us about paying attention to the needs of others. If we let them, they can also just be extensions of our egos. But if we let them, they can expand us. And that can be true of other people's pets as well. One of my favorite pandemic stories is one that Joy Berge told me, and involves the guests who are here with us today. If you've never been to Joy's house, you should definitely invite yourself over. Maybe make sure to take a mask. Maybe it'll be on the pretense of seeing her solar panel set up, which is pretty impressive. But mostly it'll be to visit Abby. You can see Abby is wise and wonderful. Joy and Abby have spent the last 6 years together. And I can confirm what you see here in front of you, which is that Abby is a warm and wonderful companion. If you visit, or when you visit, she'll come right over to say hello, see who you are, to stick that long, pointy greyhound snout in embarrassing places to start getting acquainted. All of which is fairly remarkable, considering that she spent the first 3 years of her life in the organized hell of the greyhound racing industry. Because people who don't pay attention can create a lot of harm. Abby escaped, or maybe aged out of, I don't know, one way or the other. She got out of the greyhound racing industry, bearing a lot of scars. You won't see them on her body. They're primarily psychic and emotional. And that included a deep fear of children. Not the biting kind of fear, but the kind of fear that edges away and moves back as far as possible if they're near. The energy of young human beings freaked her out. Enter Joy's neighbor, Des Farmer, who's holding the leash. Des and Abby are the same age, although it wears differently on a dog than it does on a human being. But Des was 11 as the pandemic settled in, and so was Abby. Des's school, like pretty much every school in the country, had to figure out how to handle education while there's a potentially deadly virus spreading around in the air. So Des found himself hanging around the house, being close to home a lot more than would be typical during the school year, with some extra time on his hands. And so he decided it was time for a neighborhood project, Operation Abby, overcoming her pedophobia. I like that term. I just learned that term this week too. Pedophobia is the fear of children. So there's a word for it. Nobody remembers exactly what it took. After all, the pandemic is all a blur, right? Everything just sort of melted into one. Not Joy, not Des, not Abby. Abby might, but she's not talking. I suspect it was some combination of patience, attention, patient attention, warmth, quiet, a persistent presence that was open to her fear and open to her hesitation. Those habits that bring us closer to others and closer to animals and closer to this world that we're a part of. Habits that push back against our tendency as humans to take up too much space, but that make space for others. Whatever that particular mix that Des brought to Joy's home, in time, Abby learned that this child was not frightening. In time, she learned that this child brought her something that felt like love. In time, she learned that this child brought out of her something that felt like openness and comfort. I don't know if you noticed on the bulletin cover or the image that was on the opening slide. It's also on your online order of service if you want to find it again. In time, Abby learned that she can be around children and not be afraid because of these habits of paying attention and making space. I'm convinced that those are the place to start. I mean, don't get me wrong. We're living in a world on fire, and our habits of attention are not all that we need. We need changes in behavior and political pressure and changes in laws. We need advocacy. We need massive resources devoted to creating the kinds of change that will at least mitigate some of the unfolding disaster. But we also need community and building these habits that help us to pay attention, helps to build community. When we learn to pay attention, we become better connected to others, to each other. We become better connected to creation. We become better connected to the God of creation. Not only creation writ large out there, but the creation we know intimately, our particular places, the people in our lives, the animals who we bless and who bless us, and the Spirit that brings forth all of it and holds it all together. This is God's good news. Amen.